Tactics and Practice podcast.
Bonjour! Welcome to The Future Behind Us, a podcast series where I am meeting internationally renowned artists to discuss with them the stories behind works that have become iconic. I will be asking these artists about the technological, the ethical, or even the legal challenges that they have encountered while developing their project. And I will explore in their company how the meaning of their work has changed over these past 5, 10, or 20 years. My name is Régine Debatty. I am a blogger, an art critic, a curator, and my guests in the podcast series are Trevor Paglen, Nora Al-Badri, Hubert Morgan, Gilles Magid, Paolo Pedercini from Molo Industria, Evan Ross, Mediengruppe Bitnik, Sanela Yaich, Pinar Yoldas, and Maya Srekar. In this episode, I am interviewing designer, artist, and professor Pinar Yoldas. Let's start. Dr. Pinar Yoldas is an artist and a scientist with a background in neuroscience, information technologies, and architecture. She's also a professor in visual arts at University of California, San Diego. Pinar's artworks are playful, they are dark, and they are deeply grounded in science. She creates futures where an AI kitten governs cities, where you can add an extra labia to your body if ever you fancy it, and where genetically modified babies are so exceptionally intelligent and beautiful that they will outshine every other baby. Hello, Pinar Yoldas. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm doing well.
Cool. So I was wondering, is Pinar Yoldas on the side of humans or on the side of all current and future life forms that humans are abusing these days? And this is what we're going to try and investigate in our company. So again, Pinar, thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much. That pleasure is mine.
Good. I would like to start with a sentence that I found on the Wikipedia page, and it describes your professional life. And somewhere on that page, it says that you are, and I'm quoting, known for art and architecture that focus on the Anthropocene, futurism, and feminist technoscience. So I got Anthropocene. I think I understand technofuturism, but what does feminist technoscience look like? And why do you think that this world might need more feminist technoscience?
That's an excellent question. We're embedded in technology and science, so most of my thinking have shaped around, asking questions around technology and science. However, feminism, it's a loaded word, especially in the United States. The way it's understood is a little different, perhaps, from the European context. And there has been a movement in the humanities, I would say, like 2010s, etc., or maybe mid 2010s, decentering the human. And I was very interested in that movement. And while I looked at, the cultural roots of some of the issues we're faced with, such as climate change or plastic pollution, I quickly realized that this is actually rooted in our kind of dichotomic thinking, separating who's more powerful, who's less powerful, etc. And unfortunately, women historically had been a group that had been considered not human enough in a way. And I wanted to start there also because I'm a woman and I grew up in Turkey in the 80s. Although back then extreme Islamic forces weren't as abundant as they are today, I still felt the oppression against my gender. So that's really important for me that I come from a feminist viewpoint.
And what do you think this can bring to the world? Like, why is technoscience from the point of view of a feminist?
Right. Of course. The first answer I want to give you, Régine, is it's actually from the American context. In this country, abortion is banned in certain states. And again, in this country, there's all kinds of gene therapies or, gene editing, etc. going on. in terms of reproduction. There's IVF, there are all these technologies, egg freezing, etc. And when you start looking into this, you realize that most of the science or medicine that's happening isn't really targeting women's health, right? So that's one angle. Feminist technoscience will then approach the human body or non-human bodies, and not from a heteronormative white male perspective, but embodying all other perspectives, right? So I'm seeing this as perhaps the only way out of most of these problems we're faced with, including the feminine, including women more, educating women more. And I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, I think you made perfect sense. And you said, oh, it's different in the US. But as you know, I live in Italy, and you were saying, oh, abortion is being banned in the US. And I
Right.
remember how crazy I found it. But I live in Italy, and abortion is becoming more and more difficult in Italy.
Oh, I'm sad to hear that.
Yeah, me too. But because you were talking about non-heteronormative bodies, I'm thinking about a work of yours. It's a work from 2008. It's called Neolabium. And at the time, you were imagining new sexual organs that anyone could use, no matter their gender, their sexual orientation. And it was a genetically modified labia that could attach on your, it's called vagus nerve, and it would just work. So I thought that in a sense, the work was really ahead of many of the discussions that we are having today. The mainstream media is starting to covering, and this discussion are about blurring the definitions and the distinctions between male and female. And that's something you were doing by creating these organs that anyone could enjoy. So do you find that the work, how many, is it 60? You didn't.
It's the 16th birthday of that art project. Actually, I created it in 2007 because I moved to the States around then. I was studying at in California at UCLA, and it was one of the first works that I did out of clay. Actually, my first speculative biology work. Now I look back, I think that I'm this mind who's kind of oppressed. I don't think I would be able to make that kind of work in Istanbul around that time. I mean, not possible today, perhaps, I don't know. But then when I moved to the States, I found this kind of artistic freedom where I could focus on, issues that were very, very close to me as a female who studied math, and I was a chemistry Olympian. So I was this kind of oddball in high school, which was completely targeted for raising the next generation of scientists and technologists. And for a 24-person class, there were only 4 girls in the classroom. And the boys in the group would make fun of us. They'd be like, oh, there's 300 grams of woman per man, etc. So that's how I kind of got my, scientific training. And I was always interested in how narration happens in the human body. And I had studied, the sensitivity of the skin. I've always been fascinated with skin as a sense organ. It happens to be the one organ that you can't shut down. Like you can close your eyes, right? You can close your ears, but you can't really turn off your skin. And I was thinking about sexuality, skin, sensation, pleasure. All of these concepts were actually at the back of my head with the filter of oppression, sexual oppression, right? So I believe that work is as valid as it was 16 years ago, unfortunately. And there had been instances where I would give a talk or I would, show the work, and people would think it's real. And they would kind of discreetly, secretly find me after the talk or during the opening, and they'd be like, oh, where can we get this? Or have you made this yet? So I'm still working on it, but it was kind of this idea that sexual pleasure, the sexual organ itself, shouldn't determine what that person is capable of. Actually, in tandem with your first question, feminist technoscience, I had been a follower of Elizabeth Grosz, who is a feminist thinker, philosopher, and she explains this concept of biological essentialism. So what does that mean? Just because you have a vulva and a vagina and your genital folds that morphed into something else, the 12th or 13th week of your gestational period, doesn't mean that it defines everything about you, right? So I guess I was hoping for a more free society, and I wanted to start with organs.
Wow. So people were asking you where they could get one of those additional sexual organs, but
Yes, multiple times, yes.
but could you work with a lab to really make one? Could you sell the idea?
I think it's more possible today than it was before. First off, because now I have collaborations in the university. Secondly, in the last decade or so, there's this concept of organoids. So you make a tissue and then you can grow it into its organ form, more or less. Not really, but it's in that, path at least. As far as I'm concerned, it's been difficult. It's okay to create the skin tissue, but it's difficult to create the innervation and vasculature. But I mean, I've seen papers and I went to talks, and I have a friend actually who's working on vasculature. So it could be coming. The connection to the nerve, Elon Musk started that whole thing, like he's adding things to the back of the brain. I believe neolabium is easier to attach, but of course it's surgical. Should we do it? Should we have surgery if we don't need it? All of these questions I left, I would say, open ended. But I just thought that the organ itself, the way it looked, the way it functioned, was already raising a lot of questions. And the fact that there's demand for it told me something,
Yeah, as long as you don't leave it in the hands of Elon Musk.
That's very true, yes. Don't tell him that I'm working on this.
I'm sure he's listening to this podcast eagerly.
Probably.
I would like to talk with you about Kitty AI, but first I have an anecdote. So it took place, I don't remember the year, but it was during the pandemic. And I was giving, one of these remote conferences for the Shanghai University. And before the conference, of course, we had the test. And we were checking if I could share my PowerPoint. And then the first project I was talking about was the Kitty AI. And the first image the Chinese saw was, there's this photo where you have all the heads of states. There is Barack Obama, there is Angela Merkel.
Yes.
And there was Xi Jinping. And so the people were absolutely lovely. The organizers told me, no, you have to remove that slide because there is Chairman Xi. And if ever someone from the government, we were under surveillance, and if ever someone sees it and the image has not been approved, they are going to shut down the conference. And because because it was so nice, and they were so trying to make me understand. Yes, we realize that this is absolutely absurd, but I remove, and I had other images of AI, so it was okay. But to talk about the project, Kitty AI was the first non-human governor of a big city.
Exactly. Yes, the first non-human governor.
And it's a video, and it shows this really very, very cute and very efficient kitty. And there was something I thought quite disturbing or maybe ingenious about Kitty AI is that it was so adorable. And it also had emotions and empathy. It professed its love for human citizens. And it's so different from the way AI is portrayed in the media, because usually AI is a bit cold, it's usually blue, it's faceless, it's a bit abstract. Sometimes it's even portrayed as being scary and a bit deranged. And so you came up with this idea of, internet's favorite character, the cute kitten with a childish voice. So what exactly motivated your choice to create an intelligent political entity that would be so adorable to look at and to listen to? Because there's something a bit disturbing about it.
Yeah. I mean, there are multiple, I would say, elements behind that work. First off, I was really aware of artificial intelligence research, and I was already looking into natural language processing and how most artificial intelligence systems are language based. I was studying neuroscience at that time at Duke University, and I was learning about, how language is processed. Simultaneously, I was learning about how emotions are processed. I was studying affect, and affective neuroscience was my focus, basically. So quickly into my research, I realized, and I think most of us kind of know this, it's common sense, language is only a sliver of what we're thinking. Our brains are capable of processing information that's far beyond language. But however, our culture is dominated by text. Meanwhile, we have a very large visual cortex, which makes us, image dominant also. So text also taps into that, right? But at the core of our brain, literally at the center of our brain, is a system called the limbic system. And people argue the validity of this kind of definition, but I'm just going to stick with it. And that's the system that controls emotions. And now this has also kind of become common knowledge, but it was kind of new back then. There are also faster systems like emotional systems that tell us what to do immediately, and slower systems like processing language or a math problem, like running logic over something. And I was really thinking about all of these, and I learned that without emotion, it's very difficult for humans to make decisions, right? And that actually brought me to politics. Around that time, again, I think Turkey had elections and Erdogan was elected once again. And that was a dark time for me because I was visiting parents and this newly elected president gave a speech. And I'm studying language, etc., trying my best to speak a foreign language better. This person couldn't even put four words together to form a meaningful sentence in Turkish, which is his, mother tongue. And I was like, how is it that a leader who can't speak language eloquently is supposed to make really big decisions that affect the lives of millions of people? And at that point, again, back to neuroscience, I was learning about how our brains are incapable of processing certain types of information. For instance, the fourth dimension or certain numbers. And this comes up again and again in climate science too, or climate studies or humanities, how we can't comprehend things. And it dawned on me that we're stuck with a system that originates, I guess, like thousands of years ago, not democracy, but, this one totalitarian leadership kind of model. And back then, the population size was small and the problems were less complicated, perhaps. And today, we're dealing with, like, when a leader is elected, they deal with millions of people. And the issues they tackle with is immense. They need to have multiple degrees in multiple domains to be able to have a say on these things. And you would say, well, Pinar, that's why they have advisors. But, in totalitarian regimes like Turkey, that doesn't really work. If the advisor doesn't agree with the king, their head is chopped off. And you witnessed this also when you visited China. When I showed this work in Turkey, I was also like looking behind my shoulder. Am I going to get arrested? Will I be able to come back to Turkey? Okay. So that kind of oppression, the fact that these human leaders are really failing us at multiple levels, and the rise of AI, and the fact that AI is very faceless. Again, I would see these AI ads, IBM, Watson, and IBM Watson was just a voice. It didn't have face. Or, I would see other AIs coming in, they're just a voice. I thought, okay, we are visual, we're fine-tuned to faces. We trust, we make judgments based on the landscape of emotion we detect in a face. And if AI is coming into our lives as an entity, they will need a face. I was also like thinking about Spike Jonze's Her, where they didn't give a face to AI either. And I chose the cat also because stray cats are abundant where I grew up. And I had a cat. She could be a very good president. At that time, I was inspired by her. She would sit on my lap while I was, animating this film. And all of these things came together. The way Kitty AI works, also, Trump was a factor. I'm skipping Trump altogether. This person, talks and talks and talks and tweets and tweets and tweets. And you tweet back to him, it doesn't respond. I thought if I had an AI system capable of parallel processing, just like in Her, and capable of flirting or loving people, just like how I learned in, affective neuroscience, because we make decisions based on emotion. We like have to connect with each other to care for each other at an emotional level. I thought maybe some of these issues could be gone. So I animated that character. I wanted this character to live on the mobile phones of its citizens, which is called kittizens. And she does have boundaries, of course. She can't have more than 3 million people. She can love up to 3 million people because that's the limit of her databases and her energy consumption. Then she utilizes network intelligence. She doesn't make all decisions herself. She has advisors, but those are also AI, right? And it was like easy for me. Immigration problems were happening at EU. There's recycling issues, like we can't recycle properly. There's infrastructure issues. Heat maps in cities was another thing I was exposed to. I joined, I believe this was in Amsterdam, Mixer, where a group of computer scientists made this touch table for citizens to come and look at the neighborhood and make decisions on the map. So all of those ideas actually spoke to me, and I thought maybe Kitty AI can be a governor who is not only listening to their citizens, and we can come back to how that listening can be dangerous as well, right? Because it can be surveillance. But she also cares about them. She loves them. She's capable of loving. Simultaneously, she can talk to them. She can be a chatbot for these citizens. And she can make decisions based on heat maps. So she can really like create a democratic response system. So I wanted a leader, who cared for its citizens, really. That was at the back of my thinking. But simultaneously, I was also aware that this kind of power concentrated in an AI could also lead to dark scenarios. So I put it together, and it's still on display in 2 cities as we speak. It's been a hit.
Yeah. I've seen it in several exhibitions, so I'm not surprised. I think it was really striking a chord with people, and also it's just very charming. But that's really interesting that it's still exhibited because it's from 2016.
Yes.
But maybe I'm naive. I feel that things have changed or accelerated in the world since 2016. If you think about the war, the rise of the far right in Europe, the fact that the kind of hegemony of the West is really contested. There are
Yes.
very polarized debates that we used to say, in the US, there are very polarized debates, and you can see how it's happening now in Europe. If I'm thinking about Italy or France or even my own country, Belgium, there's climate change is getting harder and harder to ignore. So in that light of things seeming to accelerate, do you find that Kitty AI makes even more sense? Is it even more desirable than ever, or you think not really?
That's actually an excellent question. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know how Kitty AI would cope with these kind of issues, because in her, narrative universe, there's this concept of politician-free zones, right? And these are zones where people aren't doing politics anymore, and it's just AIs kind of taking care of the needs of a city. So the project for me was really about looking at urban environments and trying to develop artificial intelligence systems that address the local problems of an urban environment, I would have to say. And maybe in the future, these local entities come together and a global entity is born. I didn't think about that in that sense. I like in the sense that there's going to be a war where children are being killed on a daily basis, and it's going to go on for 9 months, or I don't know. Like, it's been so long, right? I was not thinking that. I have a dark imagination, but I have to admit that I could not see this happening with the dark imagination. It exceeds my darkness, what's happening. I'm currently working on a sequel for this. I have to say, it's called Cat GPT, and with this, I have 4 of these AIs, and they will represent East, West, North, and South. So with that piece, I'm really thinking of addressing these issues. But yes, do we need a benevolent leader? Yes, we need benevolent leaders who love us, who have the potential at least to love, their people? Do we need two-way communication between the people and the politicians? Yes, we still need that, and maybe we need it even more so. But I can't really see what will come next because as I said, I wasn't expecting this level of issues at this point in time.
Okay, like I have a small sub question. How did people react to the Kitty AI? Do you find that
Right,
they thought it was
right,
a really good idea, or they
right.
get angry at the work?
Right. So it's only been 8 years, Regine, but here's what I've been observing. I'm someone who kind of like hides behind the column and watches the people's behavior with the work. Like I observe how people listen to this piece. So when I first released it, it's a 12-minute film. People would sit down and just be there for the whole thing. And some people leave because, it's an art thing, like they want to see other group show, whatever. But recently, the last couple of times I've shown it, and if I had the opportunity to observe, I noticed people's attention spans are shorter. They leave faster. And some people are very annoyed by the idea of a cat because they like dogs. Or they're like, why cat? I'm a dog person. And I'm like, well, just change the user interface then. You can have a puppy avatar too. And some people are really into it. But the way I present it is I also put like these comfortable chairs and there's a fuzzy carpet. And like, I just want people to feel relaxed. Like there's fuzzy, furry things. And like colors are all like purple and yellow, inviting, pastel colors. But I think the response that I appreciate the most is the response you gave. Okay, this is very sweet and cute and looks like it's going to solve all of our problems. This sounds like a great product, right, for the political market. But shall we do it? Shall we go there? Because there's a hint of totalitarianism here. There's a hint of panopticon. There's a hint of losing all freedom, right? But yeah, I'm getting a lot of different responses.
I would like to talk about an ecosystem of excess because the work is set in a plastic infested ocean.
Yes.
It's inspired by bacteria that exist and that can metabolize plastics.
Yes.
And from there, you imagine that plants, insects, reptiles, fish, and birds have developed organs that enable them to metabolize plastic too.
Right.
And you said that they coexist in a post-human ecosystem
Right.
that merges plastic and new life forms, so organic and synthetic matter.
Right. Right.
And I was very curious about this post-human ecosystem. Does it mean that you exclude human from the ecosystem? Is it because we don't deserve to exist at all in the future?
Oh, no, it's nothing to do with that, actually, Regine. It's not about us not deserving to be alive. It's really. So, look, when I'm thinking about these projects, I extrapolate into the future. And usually there is going to be science papers that I base the idea on. Like most of my inspiration comes from me reading pop science books or talking with scientists or reading science papers, or even if my inspiration comes from a completely different thing, like, Erdogan being reelected, I would go and bring that on. And there is a paper that was published in 2006. And then again, I think 2011, that claims that there's going to be no fish left in the ocean if we don't stop the way we do fishing, international fishing. If the international fishing practices don't change, the fisheries don't change, there's no fish will be left in the ocean by year 2048. Okay. So I was just thinking about the possibility of humans really surviving climate change if there's no ocean, right? It's all this idea of, cutting the branch you're sitting on. And in this scenario, the plastic pollution reaches such a level, and it has actually, because I started the project in 2000. The research started 2006. The project itself got a grant and was public 2014. And now a decade has passed. This is actually the 10th anniversary of that project. And I really wanted to activate some museums, etc., and like do work about that, but didn't happen. So in the past decade, now we added more plastics in the ocean. And unfortunately, I hope this isn't the case, but in the next decade, it's likely that we'll keep adding more plastics in the ocean. And we're fishing the ocean and we're doing extraction from the oceans, etc., etc. So it was just kind of like a logical next step that if these ecosystems die, there may not be any humans left. At least there's going to be mass death for some humans, maybe not all humans, right? So that's why I didn't have humans, because I thought the seeds of these new creatures are in the ocean, but evolution will take time. Even if it's genetically modified, forming an ecosystem will take time. So I was just thinking about that time scale. And according to that time scale, by the time this ecosystem emerged, humans weren't a thing anymore. Does that make sense?
It completely makes sense. And while listening to you, I realized one thing is that I remember at the time of your work and after, there were a lot of articles in the press about plastic pollution. And
Right.
over the past few years, it's about climate change and temperature getting hotter. And I had the feeling that we talk less and less about plastic. I think one thing is clear, at least to me, is that there is this constant in your work that is the future.
Uh-huh.
And it's always a future that looks a bit strange, but it's quite credible and it's not so distant.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, do you think that people need to think more about the future or differently? Because it's hard to think about the future nowadays.
Right.
Not so long ago, when I was young, the future was full of promises and we were dreaming of economic growth and improvement and technological wonders.
Right.
And now thinking about the future, it's a bit depressing. You think about sea level rise, increased authoritarian politics, AI go crazy. So change has become scary. So why do you think we need to confront the future?
Well, that's an excellent question. I have a personal answer. Would that be okay? I don't see time as okay. I see time as time. I have a watch. I'm sometimes late for meetings, etc. So I do experience time like everyone else does, yes. But for me, and I think this happened around high school, I was like really into topology and geometry, etc. Time is just another space, right? So I think about how we, especially, I mean, I'm using we, but humans are explorers and they discovered new spaces and they filled it, right? And they changed space in a way. And when we change space, and when I say space, I'm talking about maybe a mountain range, a lake, a river, an old city, those kind of things, right? And we can understand what it means to change space. And we're doing this. Landfills, the ocean composition changing, right? These are our new urban developments, or sometimes it's a rewilding project, doesn't have to be negative all the time. So we know what it means to change space. And for me, time is just another space. It's just that I can't walk into it physically as I can walk into physical space. So I think that's why I find my mind going into that space a lot, right? And I'm thinking about how we're shaping this space, how we're forming it, how we're maybe destroying it, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is, I grew up in Turkey in the 80s. And most of my generation, and I remember in college, we would get together and we wouldn't be scrolling through internet. Like there wasn't really internet, there was Orcanet. And we didn't have social media. We had books and we had a country to save. So thinking about future, thinking about problems that are much bigger than yourself, it wasn't something that I just do. It was kind of like the whole generation. It's like kind of like our pastime activity in Turkey. How do we change our country? How do we do better? Because people suffered a lot there, like in that part of the world. I think it's kind of like part of the culture. So it was always something that was ingrained in my thinking, like to think about the future, to see problems and to kind of rearrange the space, which is the future, so that those problems don't exist. Does that make sense?
Yes, I was also going to ask you how you manage to stay so upbeat. The project
Yeah.
you develop deal with global heating, plastic
Yeah.
pollution, loss of biodiversity, etc. But
Right.
I think you kind of answered that question, unless you want to add something.
Right. The fact that that whole generation, and I believe most people, I mean, think about the children who are in war zones. Like, they are going to have a complete different take on future or what life is or where they put their brain power than children who are not, faced with hardship. So that's definitely one angle. But I have to say, like, it doesn't make it easier just because I'm used to doing this. I look at a lot of images of, I call them negative sublime. So these would be images of a manta ray stuck in a, fishing net, kind of like crucified for their sins. And they have no sins. They're just angels swimming in the depths of the ocean. Or, for the ecosystem of excess work, I've seen thousands and thousands of images that display how these life forms are suffering because of plastic. Same with, as you said, climate crisis. I looked at river pollution. I worked on deforestation, and I worked on ocean issues like extraction. So I look at these images all the time, and I read news like this all the time. And yes, there is a price to pay. How do I keep my sanity? I think I can't say that I keep it very well, I have to say. And this is the first time someone is asking me how I'm doing, how my mental health is doing, honestly. I think, ride the wave of creativity, you know? I'm an ridiculously prolific person. I just have to build things and make things. And what I make, I want it to be aligned with what I believe in. So I think, like, at the back of my head, I'm calm because at least I'm using my life's time and my life space on things that matter to me and that matter for others, right? But it's not easy. And I have to say, one really difficult part for me personally had been, and I believe this is a sentiment shared by many ecologically inclined artists, it's not the issues or the darkness of the problems themselves, but it's sometimes the rejections or the struggle in the practice that we face with, like getting funding or getting like a write-up or like seeing your work have impact, right? Because we're making this work to have some cultural impact. And when that doesn't happen, that actually pushes me to depression. But the issues themselves, I'm optimistic because I know that my body heals itself and I'm a natural entity as well. And I know that these systems will heal themselves just like my body heals itself.
Wow, that's a very inspiring way to conclude this interview. So thank you so much for your time, Pinar.
Thank you. This has been really, really good for me. Thank you, Régine.
For me too, and I'm really happy that I got this opportunity to know more about you, about your generosity and your practice. So, if you are not familiar with Pinar's work, check out her Linktree. The address is Linktree /Yoldas Studio Lab, and it's written linktr.ee/Yoldas Studio Lab in one word. But anyway, the link will be in the show notes and more information. So, thank you, merci, talk to you soon. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. The Future Behind Us is a podcast series conceived and conducted by me, Régine Debatty, for the 25th edition of the Pixel Point Festival curated by Aksioma Institute for Contemporary Art as part of Go 2025 Nova Gorica Gorizia, European Capital of Culture. Thank you to Yanis fucking Yansha for the invitation to take on this challenge and for his precious collaboration and assistance in the curatorial process. Thank you also to Marcela Okritic for the impeccable coordination. The editing, the music, and the audio post-production are all by Gasper Torkar. Next week, I will be joined by artist Maya Sfrekar to talk about transspecies motherhood defying traditional views of the female body, and dogs. All episodes are available at aksioma.org/podcast, on the website of the Pixel Point Festival, and on all major podcast platforms by typing tactics and practice in the search bar. For more information on the context, the participants, and the partners involved, see the link in the description. That's it for now. Bye everyone. Au revoir.
Tactics and Practice Podcast.